Lady Whistledown here, and tonight I bring you the tale of a bride who wept throughout her wedding day. But on their wedding night, his shocking confession changed everything she thought she knew about love. What began in tears became the season's most scandalous love story. Tell me, dear listeners, could you resist a man who hides such delicious secrets behind his proper facade? Drop where you're listening from below and subscribe if you crave society's juiciest secrets. Now then, let us begin this delicious tale properly. The grandest wedding London has seen this season. Silk, diamonds, and enough tears to fill the Thames. But these were not tears of joy, I assure you. Miss Lucina Ashworth, all of 29 years and possessed of a spine straighter than a sword, stood at the altar this very morning, looking as though she were attending her own funeral rather than her wedding. And perhaps, in her mind, she was. For the gentleman awaiting her at the altar was none other than His Grace Cameron, Duke of Grantham Domain, a man of 57 winters who has been the subject of much speculation in drawing rooms across Mayfair. Now, before you gasp too loudly, let me paint you the full picture. Our dear Lucina was not exactly what one might call a blushing bride. At 29, she had long declared herself quite finished with the notion of marriage, particularly after a most unfortunate entanglement with one Micah Whitmore, a charming rogue who broke her heart so thoroughly that she swore off love entirely. She had been perfectly content to remain a spinster, thank you very much, caring for her dear mother Tabitha and living quietly on what remained of the family fortune. But here enters the villain of our tale, her own brother Conrad. That foolish young man had managed to gamble away not just his inheritance, but the entire Ashworth estate. Debts piled higher than the Tower of London, creditors circling like vultures, and poor Tabitha facing the workhouse. What was a dutiful daughter to do? Enter the Duke of Grantham Domain, like some dark knight from a Gothic novel. Society whispers that he is cold as winter frost, that his heart died with his first wife decades ago, that he cares for nothing but his estates and his reputation. They say he moves through ballrooms like a spectre, dancing with no one, speaking to few, his grey eyes seeing all, but feeling nothing. But I wonder, dear listeners, if we truly know anyone behind the masks we wear in society. The Duke made Conrad an offer that could not be refused. All debts cleared, the Ashworth name restored, and a comfortable settlement for dear Tabitha. The price? Lucina's hand in marriage. Not for love, certainly not for passion, but for propriety. The Duke, you see, required a wife for appearances, and Lucina required salvation from ruin. I watched from my vantage point as she walked down that aisle, her emerald silk dress rustling like autumn leaves, her face pale as morning mist. The Duke stood tall and imposing in his black morning coat, his silver hair catching the candlelight, his expression as unreadable as ancient stone. When the bishop asked if she would take this man as her husband, I swear the silence stretched so long that even the flowers seemed to hold their breath. "I will," she whispered, and I do believe those 2 words cost her more than all of Conrad's debts combined. The wedding breakfast was a spectacle of polite torture. Lucina sat beside her new husband like a statue carved from ice, responding to congratulations with mechanical smiles that never reached her eyes. The Duke, for his part, was courtesy itself, attentive without being familiar, respectful without being warm. He spoke when spoken to, ensured her glass was never empty, and maintained exactly the proper distance a gentleman should with his new bride. But I noticed something curious, dear listeners. While society saw only his cold politeness, I caught glimpses of something else. The way his eyes would soften when he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. The careful way he moved when near her, as though she were made of precious porcelain. The almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw when elderly Lord Pemberton made some jest about young wives and old husbands. As the carriage bore them away from the church toward his country estate, I could not help but wonder, what secrets would the darkness of their wedding night reveal? Now, my observant listeners, let me tell you what polite society chooses not to see about our reluctant bride and her mysterious groom. Lucina Ashworth, now the Duchess of Grantham Domain, though the title sits upon her shoulders like an ill-fitting cloak, is no ordinary woman. At 29, she possesses that rare quality that terrifies men and intrigues women: complete honesty about her own mind. She reads philosophy when other ladies read romantic poetry. She speaks her thoughts when others simper and agree. She chose spinsterhood not from lack of offers, but from abundance of pride. You see, dear listeners, Lucina's heart was not always so guarded. 3 years passed, she fancied herself in love with Micah Whitmore, a gentleman of modest fortune but immodest charm. He courted her with pretty words and prettier promises, speaking of a future filled with love and laughter. She, poor dear, believed every syllable. She dreamed of a cottage with roses climbing the walls, of children's voices filling empty rooms, of growing old beside a man who saw her not as a prize to be won, but as a soul to be cherished. How cruel, then, when she discovered Micah's true nature at the Pemberton ball. There he stood, her supposed beloved, whispering the very same sweet promises into Lady Caroline Fitzhugh's ear. Promises he had whispered to her just days before. When confronted, he had the audacity to laugh, declaring that he had merely been practicing his charm, and that surely she didn't expect a man like him to tie himself to a woman without fortune. The humiliation burned deeper than heartbreak. Lucina retreated from society, from men, from any possibility of love. She built walls around her heart so high that not even her dear mother Tabitha could scale them. Men, she declared to her worried parent, are creatures of convenience. They love only what serves them, and I shall never again serve any man's convenience. And now, cruel fate had delivered her directly into the hands of the most convenient marriage imaginable. But what of our Duke, you ask? Ah, Cameron, Duke of Grantham Domain, is perhaps the most misunderstood man in all of England. Society sees only what he allows them to see. A man carved from granite, emotionless as a marble statue, dutiful as clockwork. They whisper that his heart died with his first Duchess, lovely Isabella, who perished in childbed 20 years past, along with their hoped-for heir. What they do not know is that Cameron blames himself entirely for Isabella's death. She had been barely 18, a sweet child bride chosen by his father for her breeding and beauty. Cameron had tried to be kind, tried to be gentle, but he was only 27 himself and understood nothing of how to cherish a frightened young woman. When she died, he vowed never again to trap another soul in a marriage where love was expected, but not given. For 20 years, he lived like a monk, pouring his passion into his estates, his tenants, his charitable works. He built schools, funded hospitals, personally oversaw every detail of his land's prosperity. His steward Hudson often marvelled at how their grace could remember every tenant farmer's name, every child's birthday, every widow's needs. But the Duke kept this side of himself hidden, allowing society to see only the cold, dutiful nobleman they expected. When Conrad Ashworth came to him, desperate and shamefaced, offering his sister's hand in exchange for debt forgiveness, Cameron's first instinct was to refuse. But then he learned of Lucina's circumstances. A woman forced into spinsterhood by heartbreak, now facing ruin through no fault of her own. He saw in her situation an echo of his own trapped youth, and something long dormant stirred in his chest. Perhaps, he thought, he could offer her what he had never been able to give Isabella: choice. A marriage of protection rather than passion, of respect rather than romance. He would ask nothing of her that she was not willing to give, and in return, she would have security, status, and freedom from want. What he did not expect was how the sight of her tears would affect him. As she stood at that altar, proud chin trembling with the effort not to weep, something cracked in the ice around his heart. She was no frightened child like Isabella had been, but a woman of strength and substance, forced into circumstances beyond her control. And suddenly, the dutiful marriage he had planned felt like something else entirely. The carriage ride to his estate passed in heavy silence. Lucina sat pressed against the far window, her green eyes fixed on the passing countryside, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white through her gloves. Cameron found himself studying her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the elegant line of her neck, the way her dark hair caught the afternoon light. "Are you quite well, Your Grace?" he asked softly, using her new title with careful respect. She turned to him then, and he saw not tears, but steel in her eyes. "I am as well as any woman can be who has just sold her freedom for her family's survival." The honesty of it struck him like a blow. Here was no simpering miss, no grateful recipient of his charity, but a woman who understood exactly what this marriage was and what it was not. In that moment, Cameron felt something he had not experienced in 20 years, the desire to prove himself worthy of a good woman's regard. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "we might find a way to make this arrangement bearable for us both." But even as he spoke the words, Cameron knew he was lying to himself. For the first time in decades, he wanted something more than mere bearability. He wanted to see Lucina smile, truly smile, not the polite mask she wore for society. He wanted to earn her trust, her respect, perhaps even her affection. He wanted, God help him, to fall in love with his own wife. Oh, my dear, if you could have witnessed the spectacle that unfolded at Grantham Estate that very evening. The grandest of all comedies, truly, though our players were unaware they performed for my entertainment. Picture, if you will, the Duke's ancestral home, a magnificent pile of grey stone that has watched over the Yorkshire Dales for 3 centuries. Ancient oak trees line the drive like sentries, their branches creating a cathedral of green overhead. The house itself rises from the landscape like something from a fairy tale, all towers and turrets and leaded windows that gleam like diamonds in the setting sun. Lucina said not a word as their carriage rolled to a stop before the grand entrance. I confess, I held my breath as Hudson, the Duke's devoted butler of 30 years, stepped forward to welcome his new mistress. Hudson, bless his loyal heart, has served the family since he was but a boy, and his devotion to Cameron is absolute. He bowed with the precise depth due a duchess, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he said, and something in his tone suggested he truly meant it. Lucina inclined her head regally. "Thank you, Hudson. I trust the staff has been informed of the arrangements?" Such a loaded question. For you see, dear listeners, Lucina had made her expectations quite clear during their betrothal. This was to be a marriage of convenience only. Separate quarters, separate lives, united only in name and necessity. She would play the Duchess in public and the stranger in private. Indeed, Your Grace, your chambers have been prepared exactly as His Grace specified. You shall have the entire east wing for your private use. The Duke stepped forward then, offering his arm to escort her inside. Shall I show you to your rooms? I'm certain you're fatigued from the day's events. Such formal politeness, such careful distance. And yet I noticed how his hand lingered when she placed it upon his arm, how his step slowed to match her shorter stride. Small gestures, perhaps, but telling ones. The interior of Grantham Estate is every bit as impressive as its facade. Ancient tapestries line the walls, their threads still vibrant despite centuries of candlelight and time. Portrait after portrait of previous dukes stare down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow visitors as they pass. The marble floors gleam like mirrors, reflecting the light from crystal chandeliers that have witnessed centuries of Grantham family history. Lucina walked through it all like a sleepwalker, taking in the grandeur with the detached air of someone visiting a museum. Her new lady's maid, Lorena, a sensible woman of middle years whom the Duke had thoughtfully engaged for her, appeared to escort her to the east wing. Your Grace, Cameron said as they paused at the foot of the grand staircase. I know this day has been difficult. I want you to know that you are safe here. No demands will be made upon you that you are not willing to meet. Lucina turned to study his face, searching for some hint of deception or hidden meaning. And what demands might those be, Your Grace? None, he said simply. You are free to live as you choose within these walls. The house is yours to explore, the library yours to enjoy, the gardens yours to walk. I ask only that you appear at my side when society requires it. Such a pretty speech, such noble restraint. But I saw something else in the Duke's eyes as he spoke, a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. This man, who had lived like a hermit for 20 years, was suddenly sharing his sanctuary with a woman who fascinated him more than he dared admit. Lucina, however, saw only the prison bars of her new situation. How very generous of you to allow me freedom within my cage. The words hit their mark. I saw Cameron flinch as though she had struck him, though his expression remained carefully controlled. I'm sorry you see it thus. Perhaps in time, you might come to view Grantham Estate as something other than a prison. Perhaps, she replied, though her tone suggested she thought this highly unlikely. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'll retire. It has been, as you said, a difficult day. She curtsied with perfect form and turned toward the stairs, Lorena trailing behind her like a protective shadow. Cameron watched her ascend, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders straight as a soldier's. But I saw the way his fingers trembled slightly, the way his jaw tightened with emotion held rigidly in check. Oh, but the evening was far from over, dear listeners. For as the clock struck 10, Cameron did something that surprised even me. He climbed those stairs to the east wing, something no Duke of Grantham had likely done in centuries. He carried with him a small tray bearing a delicate china teacup, a silver pot of chamomile tea, and a single white rose from his prized garden. When he knocked softly on Lucina's door, I confess my heart fairly leaped with anticipation. What would our ice-cold Duchess make of this unexpected gesture? "Enter," came her voice, carefully controlled. Cameron stepped inside to find Lucina seated by the window in her dressing gown, her dark hair loose about her shoulders, a book forgotten in her lap. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, though her spine remained straight as ever. "I thought you might like some tea," he said, setting the tray on a nearby table. "Chamomile helps one sleep after Difficult days? That's very thoughtful, she replied, though her tone remained cool. Was there something else you required? And here, dear listeners, came the moment that changed everything. Instead of the polite withdrawal she expected, Cameron sat in the chair across from her, his movements easy and natural, as though he had every right to be there. Actually, he said, and I swear his voice held the faintest hint of mischief, I wanted to confess something to you. Lucina's eyes widened slightly. A confession? On our wedding night? How very dramatic of you, Your Grace. Indeed. You see, my dear wife, I fear I may have married you under false pretenses. The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying candle. Lucina set down her teacup with a sharp clink, her face going pale. What sort of false pretenses? Cameron leaned forward, his grey eyes suddenly alive with something I had never seen there before. Playfulness, warmth, the suggestion of hidden depths. I fear, Your Grace, that I am not at all the man society believes me to be. Tell me, dear listeners, what secrets do you suppose our mysterious Duke was about to reveal? Subscribe if you're loving this scandalous revelation, dear listeners. Oh, what followed that confession was perhaps the most delicious scene I have ever had the privilege to witness. For you see, our stern and proper Duke proceeded to do something so utterly unexpected that poor Lucina could only stare at him in complete bewilderment. He smiled, not the polite, measured expression he wore in society, but a genuine boyish grin that transformed his entire countenance. Suddenly, the man who had seemed carved from marble appeared vital, alive, almost young. You see, Cameron continued, his eyes dancing with mischief, society has convinced itself that I am some sort of ancient, dusty relic, a man past his prime, suitable only for duty and dullness. But I fear, my dear Duchess, that I may be rather more active than they suppose. Lucina blinked, clearly struggling to reconcile this animated stranger with the solemn man she had married mere hours ago. I'm not certain I understand what you mean. Allow me to demonstrate, he said, and before she could protest, he sprang from his chair with the fluid grace of a man half his age. Did you know, for instance, that I can still beat my grooms in a horse race? Just last week, I outran young Thomas on his finest stallion. He executed a perfect bow, flourishing his hand with theatrical flair. Or that I've been known to climb to the highest tower of this very house just to watch the sunrise. You climb towers? Lucina's voice held a note of disbelief. Indeed. Sometimes I even slide down the banister of the main staircase when no one is looking. His grin widened at her shocked expression. Hudson pretends not to see, bless him, though I suspect he worries I'll break my neck and leave him to explain to the solicitors. For the first time since their wedding ceremony, I saw Lucina's carefully controlled mask slip. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her mouth before she caught herself and smoothed her expression back to cool politeness. Your Grace, forgive me, but are you quite, well? This behaviour seems rather unlike what I was led to expect. Cameron laughed then, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill the entire room. Oh, I'm perfectly well. Better than I've been in years, actually. You see, Lucina, may I call you Lucina? I've spent 20 years playing the role of the grieving, solitary duke. Society expected it of me, so I gave them what they wanted. But in truth, I've been dying of boredom. He moved to the window and gazed out at the moonlit gardens. Do you know what I did yesterday morning? I helped birth a foal in the stables, getting thoroughly mud-stained in the process. Then I raced my head groom to the village and back. On foot, mind you. and won by 3 strides. After that, I spent 2 hours teaching the blacksmith's son to read, because the boy is bright as a penny and deserves better than society would give him. Lucina found herself leaning forward, despite her resolution to remain aloof. And what does society think you were doing? Reviewing tedious financial documents in my study, no doubt. Or perhaps brooding dramatically over my late wife's portrait. He turned back to her, his expression growing serious, which, for the record, I do not do. Isabella was a sweet child, but she's been gone 20 years. I grieved her, honoured her memory, and moved on. Life, my dear, is far too precious to spend it dwelling in the past. The words hit Lucina like a physical blow, reminding her of her own determination to remain trapped in the pain Micah had caused her. She stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace to escape the knowing look in Cameron's eyes. How very philosophical of you, Your Grace. But some wounds run deeper than others. Indeed they do, he said softly, and she heard him move closer behind her. Tell me about Micah Whitmore. She spun around, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. How dare you? Hudson is an excellent source of information when properly encouraged, Cameron said gently. I make it my business to know about those who matter to me. And you, dear wife, matter to me more than you might think. I am nothing to you but a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem, Lucina said, her voice sharp with pain. Just as I was nothing to Micah but a convenient way to practice his charm. Is that what you truly believe? Cameron stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. That I see you as merely convenient? Something in his tone made her heart skip strangely in her chest. What else could you see me as? I have no fortune, no connections, no great beauty. Stop. The command was gentle but firm. You have something far more valuable than any of those things. You have substance, Lucina. Character. The strength to sacrifice yourself for those you love. And the courage to speak your mind, even when it's inconvenient. Do you have any idea how rare that is in a woman of the ton? Lucina felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack under the assault of his unexpected kindness. Pretty words, Your Grace. I've heard them before. Have you? From whom? Certainly not from Micah Whitmore, who was too shallow to recognize treasure when he held it in his hands. Cameron's eyes blazed with sudden anger. That boy was a fool, Lucina. A weak, selfish fool, who threw away something precious because he lacked the wisdom to value it. The passionate defense of her worth, coming from this man she barely knew, left Lucina speechless. She had expected duty, politeness, perhaps occasional kindness. She had not expected this warmth, this energy. This man who seemed to see her as something other than a burden to be borne. I don't understand you, she whispered. Then allow me to be perfectly clear, Cameron said, moving close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. I did not marry you out of convenience, Lucina. I married you because from the moment I met you, I wanted to see you smile. Really smile. Not the polite mask you wear for the world. I wanted to know what makes you laugh, what makes you angry, what makes you passionate about life. You're 57 years old, she said weakly, as though his age could somehow protect her from the warmth spreading through her chest. And you're 29. What of it? He shrugged, with elegant dismissal. Age is merely a number, my dear. What matters is how one chooses to live the years one is given. I choose to live mine fully, passionately, joyfully. The question is, what do you choose? Before she could answer, he moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Oh, and Lucina? Tomorrow I'm planning to go fishing in the stream that runs through the North Meadow. Nothing would please me more than your company, if you can bear to be seen with such an ancient relic as myself. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Lucina alone with her racing heart and crumbling defences. She sank into her chair, her mind reeling with confusion. This was not the marriage she had expected, not the husband she had prepared herself to endure. This man, with his boyish grins and unexpected passions, his kindness and his strength. He was dangerous to her peace of mind in ways she had never anticipated. Outside her window, she could hear him whistling as he walked down the corridor, actually whistling. And despite herself, she found her lips curving in the first genuine smile she had worn in years. But even as her heart began to thaw, fear crept in to take its place. She had trusted before and been betrayed. Could she risk trusting again? Could she risk believing that this time, perhaps, love might not end in heartbreak? Now comes the part of our tale, dear listeners, where masks begin to slip and hearts reveal their true nature. For you see, our dear Lucina discovered that living with the Duke of Grantham Domain was rather like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. The morning after his surprising confession, Lucina woke to find a note slipped under her door. Written in Cameron's bold hand, "The fishing expedition departs at dawn. Practical dress advised." Dawn had come and gone hours ago, but when she ventured to her window, she could see a lone figure by the stream in the distance. Despite every rational thought telling her to remain safely in her rooms, Lucina found herself donning her simplest walking dress and making her way through the gardens toward the water. What she discovered there nearly made her turn back in shock. The dignified Duke of Grantham Domain was sitting on the bank with his boots off, his stockings rolled up, his feet dangling in the stream like a carefree boy on holiday. His fishing rod lay forgotten beside him as he watched the water flow over his toes, his face tilted toward the sun with an expression of pure contentment. "You came," he said, without turning around, though she was certain she had made no sound approaching. "I was curious," she admitted, settling carefully on a fallen log several feet away from him. Curiosity is a wonderful quality. Isabella had none whatsoever, poor dear. She found my interests quite incomprehensible. He glanced at her sideways, his eyes twinkling. "Do you know what I did on my 27th birthday? The day I became a duke?" Lucina shook her head, finding herself drawn into his easy manner despite her reservations. "I climbed the highest oak tree on the estate and refused to come down until Hudson threatened to fetch a ladder. I was mourning my freedom, you see. I knew that from that day forward I would have to be dignified and proper and dull as dishwater." He grinned. "It took me 20 years to realize that being a duke didn't have to mean being dead inside." What changed? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cameron was quiet for a long moment, absently trailing his fingers in the water. "Loneliness, I suppose. One can only play at being a statue for so long before one begins to forget how to feel human. About 5 years ago, I decided I would rather be thought eccentric than continue to die a little each day." He turned to look at her fully then, his expression growing serious. "That's when I started really living again. Racing horses, climbing towers, helping birth foals, teaching children to read. The estate flourished because I stopped hiding in my study and started walking among my people. I discovered that life becomes quite wonderful when one stops apologizing for feeling joy." Lucina felt something twist in her chest at his words. When had she stopped feeling joy? When had she begun to wear her pain like armor, protection against any future hurt? It's easier to remain numb, she said quietly. Safer. Easier, yes, but hardly living. Cameron pulled his feet from the stream and turned to face her completely. Lucina, may I tell you something that will probably shock you? She nodded, though part of her feared what he might say. I have been more truly alive in the 3 days since I proposed to you than I was in the entire previous year. Do you know why? Her heart began to race, though she couldn't say why. No. Because for the first time in 20 years, I had something to look forward to. Someone to consider. Someone whose happiness mattered to me more than my own comfort. His eyes searched her face intently. You think I married you out of duty or pity, but you're wrong. I married you because you fascinate me, Lucina. Because your strength calls to something in me that I thought was long dead. You don't know me, she protested weakly. Don't I? He smiled. I know you read philosophy because Hudson found Descartes in the library with your marker still between the pages. I know you play piano beautifully because I heard you practicing in the music room yesterday evening when you thought no one was listening. I know you have a kind heart because you stopped to help little Meg, the scullery maid, when she dropped her tray in the corridor this morning. Lucina stared at him in amazement. You've been watching me. Observing, he corrected gently. Learning. Trying to understand the woman who has turned my ordered world completely upside down. He reached for his boots, pulling them on with efficient movements. Would you like to know what else I've observed? She nodded mutely. You're terrified, he said simply. Not of me, but of feeling something. You've built walls so high that you've forgotten there's a world outside them. And underneath all that careful control, you're dying of loneliness just as I was. The words hit her like physical blows, stripping away her defenses with surgical precision. You have no right. I have every right. I'm your husband. But his tone remained gentle, understanding. Lucina, what did Micah do to you? What happened that hurt you so deeply you swore off love entirely? The whole sorry tale spilled out then. Micah's courtship, her naive trust, the humiliation of discovering his betrayal, the crushing realization that she had been nothing more than practice for his real conquests. She told him about the laughter that followed her from drawing room to drawing room, the pitying looks, the whispered comments about foolish spinsters who thought themselves beloved. When she finished, Cameron was quiet for a long moment. Then, to her utter amazement, he began to laugh. You're laughing at me, she said, hurt flashing in her eyes. Not at you, my dear. At him. Cameron's eyes blazed with something that might have been fury. Do you realize what that idiotic boy threw away? He had the love of an intelligent, passionate, beautiful woman. And he discarded it to chase after silly girls with nothing but prettiness to recommend them. The fool doesn't deserve your tears, Lucina. He deserves your pity. Beautiful, she echoed, focusing on the one word that seemed impossible. Extraordinarily so, not in the simpering, artificial way that's fashionable, but truly beautiful. The kind of beauty that comes from strength and character and a soul that burns bright despite all attempts to dim it. He stood and offered her his hand. Come, let me show you something. Against her better judgment, she took his hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. His touch was warm, sure, completely unlike Micah's careless grasps. He led her back toward the house, but instead of going inside, he guided her to the conservatory, a magnificent glass structure filled with exotic plants and flowers from around the world. This, he said, gesturing to the lush paradise around them, is what I've spent 20 years creating. Every plant, every flower, chosen and tended with care. Do you know why? She shook her head, overwhelmed by the beauty surrounding them. Because I needed to create something lovely in a world that had shown me too much darkness. I needed to prove to myself that beautiful things could still grow, even after loss, even after pain. He turned to her, his expression intense. You are my greatest creation, Lucina. Not because I made you, but because I chose you. Because in all the world, you were the one soul I wanted to tend and cherish and watch bloom. The declaration hung between them like a challenge, like a promise, like a prayer. Lucina felt her carefully guarded heart crack open just a little, letting in the first rays of hope she had felt in years. But with hope came terror, and she pulled back, shaking her head. I can't. I won't risk it again. I won't be hurt again. Then don't risk it, Cameron said quietly. Let me do the risking. Let me love you until you remember how to love yourself. The words broke something inside her, some last, desperate barrier that had been holding back a flood of longing she hadn't even realized she carried. But even as her heart cried out to accept his offer, her mind reared back in panic. She was not ready. She might never be ready. And this man, this wonderful, impossible man, deserved so much more than a wife who could offer nothing but fear disguised as caution. I need time, she whispered. Then time you shall have, he said simply. All the time in the world, my dear Duchess. I'm not going anywhere. But as they walked back to the house in silence, both lost in their own thoughts, neither of them saw the figure watching from an upstairs window. Estella Pemberton, society's most accomplished gossip, who had come calling and been thoroughly entertained by the scene she had just witnessed. The game, dear listeners, was about to become far more complicated. Oh, my dear, how quickly joy can turn to sorrow, how swiftly hope can curdle into despair. For you see, Lady Estella Pemberton possessed the singular talent of turning innocent observations into scandalous revelations, and she had just witnessed enough material to fuel London's gossip mills for months. Within a week, the whispers had begun. Hushed conversations in drawing rooms, knowing looks exchanged over tea, and letters flying between households like arrows finding their mark. The tale, as it spread through society, bore little resemblance to the truth I had witnessed. According to the Ton's collective imagination, the Duke of Grantham Domain had suffered some sort of mental breakdown brought on by his marriage to a woman young enough to be his daughter. He was behaving like a lovesick boy, they said, making a fool of himself over a fortune-hunting spinster who had clearly bewitched him with her wiles. Why else would a man of his dignity be seen dangling his feet in streams and chasing after his reluctant bride like some besotted youth? The gossip reached Lucina's ears through her maid Lorena, who heard it from the cook, who had it from the butcher's wife, who claimed she had it directly from Lady Estella herself. Each telling made the tale more lurid, more damaging to both their reputations. They're saying your grace has made the Duke forget himself entirely, Lorena reported with obvious distress, that he's acting the fool for love, and that you've rejected his advances so thoroughly that he's lost all sense of propriety. Lucina sat frozen at her dressing table, the hairbrush in her hand forgotten. This was her worst nightmare made manifest, becoming the subject of society's cruel entertainment once again. The humiliation of Micah's betrayal came flooding back, accompanied by the familiar sting of being found wanting, being mocked, being deemed unworthy of proper love. But worse than her own shame was the realization of what she had done to Cameron. This good man, This kind soul, who had offered her nothing but patience and understanding, was being ridiculed because of her. His dignity, carefully maintained for 20 years, was being shredded by wagging tongues, and it was entirely her fault. That evening at dinner, the change in Cameron was unmistakable. Gone was the playful, warm man who had shared confidences by the stream. In his place sat the Duke of Grantham Domain in all his formal glory, perfectly proper, utterly composed, and completely unreachable. He spoke only when spoken to, maintained proper distance, and treated her with the courteous indifference one might show a respected acquaintance. "Have you heard from your mother recently?" he asked, cutting his meat with precise movements. "She is well, thank you," Lucina replied, her heart sinking at his polite tone. "Excellent. Please give her my regards when next you write." The stilted conversation continued through 3 courses, each exchange more painfully formal than the last. When Lucina could bear it no longer, she set down her fork and looked directly at him. "You've heard the gossip?" Cameron didn't deny it. "London's drawing rooms have apparently found our marriage quite entertaining." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never intended for you to be hurt by this arrangement." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or disappointment. "Nor I you. It seems we have both miscalculated." The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples of hurt that spread outward until the entire room seemed heavy with unspoken regret. After dinner, Cameron retreated to his study and did not emerge. Lucina found herself alone in the drawing room, staring into the fire and wondering how something that had felt so right could have gone so terribly wrong. Days passed in this new, terrible politeness. Cameron rose early and retired late, conducting his business with his usual efficiency, but none of his former joy. When they encountered each other in the corridors, he bowed with perfect form, and she curtsied with mechanical precision, like actors playing roles they had learned by heart. The household felt the change immediately. Hudson's cheerful morning greetings became subdued. Lorena fussed over Lucina's appearance with worried intensity. Even the gardeners seemed to work more quietly, as though the very air around Grantham Estate had grown heavy with sorrow. But it was Conrad's unexpected arrival that delivered the final blow to Lucina's crumbling composure. Her brother appeared at the estate unannounced, ostensibly to check on her welfare, but actually, as she quickly realized, to ensure that his salvation remained secure. "You look pale, sister," he observed over tea, his eyes taking in her subdued manner and simple dress. "Marriage to his grace suits you, I hope." "Perfectly," she lied, maintaining the pretense for appearance's sake. "Good, good. I confess, I was somewhat concerned by the rumours reaching London. Talk of his grace behaving oddly. You haven't done anything to upset him, have you?" The casual cruelty of the question, the assumption that any marital difficulties must be her fault, struck Lucina like a physical blow. Here was her own brother, the man whose debts had created this entire situation, now questioning whether she was fulfilling her part of the bargain adequately. "I have conducted myself exactly as expected," she said stiffly. Of course. But you must understand, Lucina, how important this marriage is to our family, to Mother's security, to the restoration of our name. If anything were to go wrong—" He left the threat unfinished, but his meaning was clear. That night, Lucina stood at her window, watching the moon rise over the gardens Cameron had created with such love and care. She understood now, with crystalline clarity, the impossible position she occupied. If she allowed herself to care for him, society would destroy them both with its mockery. If she maintained her distance, she would slowly break his generous heart and her own in the process. And underneath it all lay the terrible truth she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with her husband, not with his title or his wealth, but with the man who climbed towers to watch the sunrise, who helped birth foals with gentle hands, who saw her not as a burden to be borne, but as a treasure to be cherished. But love, she had learned, was not always enough. Sometimes love meant sacrifice. Sometimes love meant letting go. The next morning, she penned a careful letter to Cameron, explaining that she thought it best if they maintained the formal distance society expected of them. She was grateful for his kindness, she wrote, but she understood now that their arrangement was meant to be one of mutual benefit, not mutual affection. She would endeavour to be the duchess he needed in public, and she hoped he would allow her the privacy to recover her equilibrium in time. She signed it, "Your obedient wife, Lucina," and left it on his desk before retreating to her rooms, where she finally allowed herself to weep for what might have been. When Cameron found the letter that evening, I swear I heard something break in the very walls of Grantham Estate. The man who had been coming alive again retreated so completely into his shell that even Hudson began to worry for his health. And so, dear listeners, we find our lovers at their darkest hour. Two hearts that had begun to beat in harmony now deliberately pulling themselves apart, each believing they were protecting the other, both succeeding only in ensuring their mutual misery. For as any student of the human heart knows, there is no pain quite like the agony of loving someone and believing that love to be impossible, unwanted, or doomed to bring nothing but sorrow to the very person one most wishes to cherish. Now, my dear listeners, comes the moment when even the most stubborn hearts must choose between the safety of solitude and the terrible, wonderful risk of love. For you see, sometimes it takes the wisdom of servants to teach their masters what true nobility really means. It was Hudson who finally broke the spell of misery that had settled over Grantham Estate like a London fog. The faithful butler, who had served the family for 30 years and loved Cameron like the son he'd never had, could no longer bear to watch his master retreat into the cold, grey existence he'd fought so hard to escape. On a particularly dreary morning, when rain lashed against the windows and the Duke sat in his study, staring blankly at papers he had no intention of reading, Hudson did something he had never done in 3 decades of service. He spoke without being spoken to. "Your Grace," he said, entering with the morning tea and closing the door firmly behind him. "I must speak plainly." Cameron looked up in surprise. Hudson's tone brooked no argument, despite the perfect deference of his posture. "You are breaking that young lady's heart, and she is breaking yours, and both of you are too proud and too frightened to admit it." "Hudson," Cameron began, his voice carrying a warning. "No, Your Grace. For once you will listen to me." The butler's weathered face was stern with purpose. "I have watched you these past weeks retreat into the same grey half-life you lived before Her Grace arrived. I have seen her weeping in the conservatory when she thinks no one observes. I have watched two people who clearly love each other torture themselves with misplaced nobility." Cameron's hands stilled on his papers. "Love is not always enough, Hudson." "No, Your Grace, but it is always worth fighting for." Hudson moved closer, his voice gentling. "Do you remember what you told me 5 years ago when you decided to stop hiding behind your title? You said that life was too precious to waste on fear." The words hit their mark. Cameron's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly, revealing the pain he'd been carrying. "The gossip will pass, as gossip always does. But if you surrender your happiness to appease the very people who have never dared to live as fully as you do, then they will have won something far more valuable than mere reputation. Hudson paused, his voice growing soft with affection. Your Grace, in all my years of service, I have never seen you as alive as you were in those first days after your marriage. Do not let fear rob you of that again. Meanwhile, in the East Wing, Lucina was receiving her own lecture from an unexpected source. Lorena, the practical lady's maid who had served noble families for 20 years, had finally reached her limit of watching her mistress slowly wither away. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace," she said, as she arranged Lucina's hair with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. "But you're making a right mess of things." Lucina met her maid's eyes in the mirror, too surprised to take offense. "I beg your pardon? His Grace is a good man, the best I've served in all my years, and you're throwing away the finest marriage I've ever witnessed because you're afraid of what a bunch of bored society ladies might whisper over their tea." Lorena's hands stilled in Lucina's hair. "My lady, I've served duchesses who would have given anything for a husband who looked at them the way His Grace looks at you." "You don't understand," Lucina protested. "The scandal is nonsense created by people who have nothing better to do than tear down others' happiness." Lorena's voice grew fierce with protectiveness. "His Grace has spent 20 years being exactly what they expected: cold, proper, and miserable. For the first time in decades, he dared to be happy, and they cannot forgive him for it." The maid moved to face Lucina directly, her expression earnest. "Your Grace, forgive me for speaking boldly, but love like what you two share is rarer than diamonds. To throw it away for fear of gossip, well, that's the real tragedy." That afternoon, as if drawn by forces beyond their control, both Cameron and Lucina found themselves in the conservatory, he entering from the main house, she from the garden door. They stopped short upon seeing each other, the air between them crackling with weeks of suppressed emotion and unspoken longing. "Lucina," Cameron said softly, and the simple sound of her name on his lips made her heart leap. "Your Grace," she replied, though the formal address sounded wrong, forced. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the space filled with growing things, plants that bloomed despite seasons, that reached toward light despite obstacles, that persisted in beauty despite being transplanted from their native soil. "I've been thinking," Cameron said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "about what you wrote in your letter." Lucina's heart sank. She had hoped he might fight her decision, might argue with her reasoning, but if he was ready to accept her withdrawal— "And I've decided," he continued, stepping closer, "that you're absolutely right." The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt her face go pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of a planting table for support. "Right," she repeated hollowly. "Yes." He moved closer still, close enough that she could see the determined glint in his grey eyes. "You're right that we should stop caring what society thinks. You're right that this marriage should be about what we want, not what others expect. And you're right that we've been letting fear rule our decisions instead of letting love guide them." Lucina's breath caught. "Love? Oh yes, my dear Duchess. Love." Cameron's voice grew warm, passionate, alive with the energy she had fallen in love with. "Because that's what this is, isn't it? This impossible, inconvenient, absolutely wonderful feeling that's been growing between us, despite all our efforts to deny it." "Cameron," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. "I love you, Lucina," he said simply, the words ringing through the glass-walled room like a bell. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your fierce independence. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see through society's pretenses to the truth beneath. I love that you chose to marry me not for my title or my wealth, but to save your family. And I love that you're brave enough to push me away when you think it's for my own good. Tears began to flow down her cheeks as weeks of suppressed emotion finally found release. But most of all, Cameron continued, reaching out to cup her face gently in his hands, I love that you've taught me how to feel alive again, and I'll be damned if I'll let a bunch of gossiping fools rob us of something so precious. The scandal, she began weakly. Let them talk, he said fiercely. Let them whisper and speculate and disapprove. We'll give them something truly shocking to discuss. A marriage based on genuine love instead of cold convenience. A duke who dares to be happy with his duchess instead of merely dutiful. His thumbs brushed away her tears with infinite tenderness. The question is, my darling wife, are you brave enough to love me back? Are you willing to risk your heart one more time for the chance of something real? Lucina looked into his eyes, those storm-grey eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness, patience, and understanding, and felt the last of her defences crumble. Fear still lived in her heart, but love lived there too, stronger and brighter than any shadow. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible but heavy with promise. Oh yes, Cameron, I do love you. I've been fighting it for weeks. But I love you desperately. The smile that spread across his face was radiant as sunrise, young and joyful and completely transformative. When he lowered his head to kiss her, Lucina felt as though she were finally coming home after a long, cold journey through darkness. And in that moment, surrounded by blooming flowers and growing things, two wounded hearts finally found the courage to heal together. Oh, my most devoted listeners, if you could have witnessed what transpired next. For you see, love finally unleashed is a force more powerful than any scandal, more enduring than any gossip, and far more entertaining than anything society's limited imagination could devise. The kiss that sealed their confession lasted only moments, yet it changed everything. When they finally drew apart, both Cameron and Lucina were transformed, not into different people, but into the people they had always been meant to be when freed from fear and pretense. Now then, Cameron said, his eyes dancing with the mischief she had come to adore, I believe it's time we gave London something truly worth talking about. What did you have in mind? Lucina asked, though something in his expression told her she was about to discover just how wonderfully unpredictable her husband could be. Well, my dear Duchess, I was thinking we might attend Lady Pemberton's ball next week. You know, the one where all of society will be gathered to dissect our marriage over champagne and gossip. His grin was positively wicked. I have a fancy to show them exactly what kind of marriage we've created. The idea should have terrified her. Lady Pemberton's balls were legendary for their grandeur and for the vicious social manoeuvring that took place beneath the glittering surface. It would be the perfect venue for society's most accomplished gossips to deliver their most cutting observations. Instead, Lucina found herself laughing, the first truly joyful sound she had made in weeks. You want to scandalize them properly this time? Oh, yes, Cameron said, drawing her close again. I want to dance with my wife as though I adore her, which I do. I want to be seen enjoying her company, seeking her opinions, treating her as though she matters to me more than anyone else in the room, which she does. And I want everyone to see that the Duke of Grantham Domain has finally remembered how to be happy. They'll say we're both mad, Lucina warned. though her heart was racing with excitement at the prospect. Let them. Madness is often simply another word for joy that makes others uncomfortable. He spun her around the conservatory, her skirts swirling among the flowers. Besides, I have a secret weapon they don't expect. Which is? You, my darling. You're going to charm them senseless. Not by playing their games, but by being utterly, authentically yourself. Intelligence and wit and strength are their own kind of beauty, and society recognizes real quality when it's presented with confidence. The week that followed was a revelation. Instead of hiding their affection from the household, Cameron and Lucina embraced it openly. They walked the gardens hand in hand, discussing everything from philosophy to farm management. They rode together in the mornings, Lucina's laughter ringing across the meadows as Cameron proved he could indeed outrace men half his age. They spent evenings in the music room, where she played and he sang in a surprisingly fine baritone, or in the library, where they read to each other by firelight. Hudson practically glowed with satisfaction, while Lorena took special pride in selecting gowns that would show her mistress to best advantage. Even the stable boys seemed to work with extra enthusiasm, as though the happiness of their master and mistress had infected the entire estate with renewed life. But it was the arrival of an unexpected letter that provided the perfect opportunity for Cameron to demonstrate the depth of his devotion. The letter came from Micah Whitmore himself, now apparently in financial difficulties and hoping to impose upon the Duke's well-known generosity. Lucina went white as parchment when she recognized the handwriting, and Cameron's expression darkened dangerously as he read the presumptuous missive. "He wants you to receive him," Cameron said, his voice deadly quiet. "He claims he wishes to congratulate you on your advantageous marriage and renew your old friendship." "The audacity," Lucina breathed, sinking into a chair as old humiliations threatened to overwhelm her. But Cameron's response was swift and decisive. He moved to his desk, took up his pen, and began writing with sharp, angry strokes. "What are you doing?" Lucina asked. "Writing to inform Mr. Whitmore that his presence at Grantham Estate would be neither welcome nor tolerated," Cameron replied without looking up. "And that any future attempts to contact my wife will be met with the full force of my displeasure." The fierce protection in his voice, the immediate way he had moved to shield her from further hurt, made Lucina's heart swell with love so profound it nearly took her breath away. "You would do that? Risk offending him when he might spread gossip about your response?" Cameron looked up from his letter, his eyes blazing with emotion. "Lucina, I would challenge him to a duel before I would allow him to cause you one moment's distress. Let him gossip. Let him rage. Let him tell all of London that the Duke of Grantham Domain protects what belongs to him. It will only prove what everyone should already know, that I am completely, irrevocably devoted to my wife." The letter he sent was a masterpiece of aristocratic disdain, politely worded but utterly unmistakable in its message. Word of it spread through London within days, carried by servants and gossiped about in coffee houses, and the Ton found itself faced with something they had not expected, a duke who was not only willing to defend his wife's honour, but proud to do so publicly. The night of Lady Pemberton's ball arrived with all the anticipation of a theatrical performance. Lucina dressed with special care in a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, while Cameron appeared in evening dress that reminded everyone why he had once been considered one of London's most eligible bachelors. When their carriage arrived at the Pemberton mansion, heads turned immediately. The couple who emerged were not the dutiful strangers society expected, but two people clearly comfortable in each other's company, united in purpose and radiant with shared happiness. "Ready, my love?" Cameron asked, offering his arm. With you. I'm ready for anything, Lucina replied, and meant every word. The ballroom fell silent as they entered, a sea of faces turning to watch their progress. But instead of the awkward, formal couple society had been dissecting, they saw the Duke of Grantham Domain escorting his Duchess with obvious pride, his attention focused entirely on her rather than on the crowd watching them. When the dancing began, Cameron led Lucina onto the floor for the first waltz, and it became immediately clear that whatever else might be said about their marriage, it was no cold arrangement of convenience. They moved together with perfect harmony. Cameron's eyes never leaving his wife's face, his smile genuine and warm. They're staring, Lucina murmured as they turned. Let them stare, Cameron replied. They're seeing something they thought was impossible, a marriage that makes both partners happy. As the evening progressed, the whispers gradually changed in tone. Instead of mockery, there was bewilderment, then grudging admiration. Here was a couple who clearly enjoyed each other's company, who conversed as equals, who seemed genuinely fond of one another. It was, society began to realize, rather wonderful to witness. Lady Estella Pemberton herself approached them during supper, her expression curious rather than malicious. Your Grace, she said to Lucina, you seem remarkably content in your marriage. I am, Lady Pemberton. Remarkably content indeed. Lucina's smile was radiant. I find that love makes everything easier to bear, don't you? The simple honesty of the statement, delivered without defensiveness or apology, left the gossip momentarily speechless. Here was no fortune-hunting schemer or reluctant bride, but a woman confident in her husband's affection and her own worth. By evening's end, the scandal had transformed into something else entirely. A love story that reminded everyone present why marriage at its best was worth celebrating rather than enduring. As they rode home through the moonlit countryside, Lucina nestled against Cameron's shoulder, marveling at how completely her world had changed. No regrets? He asked softly. Only one, she replied, tilting her face to look at him. And what is that? That it took us so long to stop being afraid of happiness. Cameron's answering kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and as their carriage rolled through the gates of Grantham Estate, home, truly home at last, both knew that they had found something worth far more than society's approval. They had found love that was stronger than fear, truer than reputation, and more enduring than any gossip the tongue could devise. And thus, dear listeners, the Duke of Grantham Domain was indeed redeemed, not from sin, but from the far greater tragedy of a life half lived, a heart half open, and a love almost lost to pride and fear. 6 months have passed since that transformative ball, my dear listeners, and Lady Whistledown here with the most satisfying conclusion to our tale. Our Duke and Duchess have become the toast of London, not for scandal this time, but for something far more remarkable, genuine happiness. Cameron has shed his cold, dutiful persona and emerged vital and passionate, racing stallions at dawn and dancing with his wife at every social function with such obvious delight that other husbands look rather shabby by comparison. Lucina has blossomed like a flower, finally receiving proper light. Gone is the guarded woman who arrived at Grantham Estate in tears. In her place stands a duchess of substance, speaking her mind with wit and wisdom, becoming London's most sought-after guest, not for her title, but for her conversation. The change in their household has been equally remarkable. Hudson practically bounces through his duties, while Lorena has become something of a celebrity among ladies' maids. Even the gardeners work with extra enthusiasm, as though love has infected the very soil of Grantham Estate. Perhaps the most telling evidence came last week, when Conrad visited to find his sister in the stable yard, laughing as she helped deliver a foal while Cameron held the lantern. "Good Lord, Lucina," Conrad exclaimed. "You look positively improper." "Do I?" she replied with sparkling eyes. "How wonderful." Society has largely given up trying to disapprove of them. It's difficult to maintain moral superiority over a couple who so obviously adore each other. Several matchmaking mamas have begun studying their courtship in hopes of engineering similar transformations. When dear Tabitha visited and found her daughter genuinely content, she confessed, "I feared I had sacrificed your happiness for our family's survival." "Oh, Mamma," Lucina replied, "you gave me the greatest gift. You placed me in the path of the one man who could teach me to trust love again." As I write this, I can see them walking hand in hand through their gardens, pausing to laugh at shared jokes, stealing kisses when they think no one watches. They're planning to winter in Italy, their first real wedding journey, taken from desire, not duty. But here's one delicious detail. There are signs that by spring, Grantham Estate may ring with children's laughter. The prospect represents the final triumph of love over fear, hope over despair. Indeed, my dear listeners, even the coldest heart may bloom again beneath love's scandalous sun. What began as duty became devotion. Arrangement became adoration. They've proven it's never too late to fall in love, never wrong to choose joy over safety. Do you believe love truly conquers all? Whisper your thoughts below, and stay tuned for my next revelation. For London's drawing rooms are never short of secrets. Until next we meet in the scandalous shadows of the Tun, I remain your devoted observer of all things romantic, ridiculous, and utterly, wonderfully human. If this tale stirred your heart, do subscribe for more whispered secrets from the Ton.